All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Building Digital Collections. Before we jump in, I just have a couple of quick housekeeping notes and community guidelines to mention. So one, if you have any sound or technical issues today, please let me know in the chat box with the direct message, and I'll do my best to help you out. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording, as well as a PDF of the slideshow and a couple of other resources, are going to be sent out to all registrants probably within the next week or so. We are going to be doing a Q&A at the end of the presentation, but feel free to send your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and then we're just going to get to them all like at the very end. And then finally, we ask that you hold each other with mutual respect, come to the space teachable, and stay engaged with our presenter throughout the program. So now I just want to share a little bit about the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services for New York program. DHPSNY, as we like to call ourselves, is a collaboration between the New York State Archives and the New York State Library, with services provided by the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. DHPSNY is a statewide program that provides free planning and education services to support the vast network of collecting institutions such as archives, libraries, historical societies, museums, and other organizations that safeguard and ensure access to New York's historical records and library research materials. DHPSNY services includes archival needs assessments, preservation and condition surveys, strategic planning assistance, and access to a wide variety of educational programs, such as today's webinar. So to learn more about any of our services, you can visit us at DHPSNY.org. So with all that, I'm going to pass things over to Ryan to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Hughes. I want to thank you all for being here today. And I would like to thank DHPSNY for having me and for hosting this webinar. Today, I'll be talking about building digital collections. Before we start, I'd like to provide a little bit of information about myself. I am the Digital Services Manager for the Rochester Regional Library Council, a part of the Empire State Library Network. As Digital Services Manager, I support our member contributions to various ESLN digital services, including New York State Historic Newspapers, Empire ADC, and New York Heritage Digital Collections. I'm also the project coordinator for New York Heritage. Together with liaisons from 7 other ESLN councils, we work closely with our contributing members to identify relevant collections, support the creation of high-quality metadata, advise on best practices for copyright issues, digitization, and preservation of digital assets. My previous experience includes working in public libraries, where I spent 16 years at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh in various roles. For today's presentation, I'll be expanding on some of the things I would normally share with one of our members prior to starting a digitization project for New York Heritage. In my role at RRLC, my goal is to provide our member contributors with information that's going to take them from a starting point of having an idea for a digital collection to seeing that collection published on the New York Heritage site. This process includes a discussion about how their physical collections are organized, what intellectual work has been done to describe them, what types of resources are needed to transform the physical objects into well-described digital objects. And this presentation is a broad overview of some of the important considerations to be made when building a digital collection. So what makes a good digital collection? For the first part of this presentation, I'll be referencing a framework for guidance for building good digital collections by the National Institute of Standards organization. I've included a link to this document and some other resources at the end of the presentation, and those will be shared with you. So let's start by defining a good digital collection. According to the authors, the meaning of good has changed over time. A good digital collection at one time could simply have been a proof of concept. Think about those early efforts where photographs, maps, or postcards were presented on a website. The collection was browsable, but it lacked detailed description or the ability to search and sort based on descriptive metadata such as date, subject, or creator. The second stage was focused on usability and accessibility. Greater effort was put towards describing the digital objects and building collections that are relevant to a community of users. And then lastly, the third stage that defined a digital collection's goodness as follows. Goodness now demands interoperability, reusability, persistence, verification, documentation, and support for intellectual property rights. I'll talk a bit more about some of these characteristics during the presentation. Before that, let's review some of the principles that the National Information Standards Organization, or NISO, outlines as being important to building good digital collections. The first principle is a good digital collection is created to I'm going to take a step back. I apologize. I want to preface this by saying that these principles are an ideal standard. The reality is that many institutions interested in building good digital collections have limited funding, staffing, or technical expertise. Instead of focusing on the challenges of meeting these principles, I would encourage you to consider how you can adapt them to fit your situation. So our first principle, a good digital collection is created according to an explicit collection development policy that has been agreed upon and documented before building the collection begins. A digital collection development policy exists to set the criteria for determining what collections will be digitized, preserved, and made accessible. I'll be talking more about digital collection policy shortly. What I will stress here is that having a policy in place before you start will give your work focus. In the same way that you make considerations about what you add to your physical collections, you want to have a similar set of guidelines in place for your digital collections. Collection principle 2, collections should be described so that the user can discover characteristics of the collection, including scope, format, restrictions on access, ownership, and any information significant for determining the collection's authenticity, integrity, and interpretation. Think of this as the narrative description of your collection. And I've included an example on the next slide from a New York Heritage collection. So what you see here, in addition to a really great image, is just some basic facts about this collection. The historical context statement. The statement provides a visitor with the context, whether it's geographical, historical, and/or cultural significance, through which they can view this collection. The scope statement defines the types of objects a visitor will find in the collection. And then collection facts. This includes the extent of the collection or the number of items that you'll find, as well as the time frame that the original items were produced. So with this type of information, a visitor already knows a good bit about the collection and really has an idea of what they're going to find there. Collection principle 3, a good collection is curated, which is to say its resources are actively managed during the entire life cycle. It's important to remember that publishing your digital collection is not enough. Like a physical collection, digital collections need to be reviewed periodically to ensure you're presenting the most up-to-date information about the collection and the digital objects within it. For example, you can enhance metadata based on the availability of new information about the subject. Similarly, some of the digital objects may have moved into the public domain since the collection was first published. We always encourage our contributors to continue to review the objects in their collections and make any necessary changes. Collection principle 4, a good collection is broadly available and avoids unnecessary impediments to use. Collections should be accessible to persons with disabilities and usable effectively in conjunction with adaptive technologies. So think about this in terms of 1, availability. Can the collection be accessed on demand? Usability. Can the objects be viewed across different platforms or devices? Are there any technical impediments to accessing the data? And 3, accessibility. Does your collection interface accommodate visual or auditory impairments? So a lot of us may not have control over the interfaces that we're using, particularly if we're using something that would be like a subscription like Content DM. Since most of us don't have that, there are things that we can do when we're building our collections, something like creating metadata for objects like handwritten letters or manuscripts. Having access to the transcripts for these files greatly improves the accessibility. Collection principle 5, a good collection respects intellectual property rights. Before you start building your collection, make sure you have the right to digitize and publish the works. A pre-existing deed of gift may not cover digitally distributing the items in your collection. At New York Heritage, if a clear set of permissions is unavailable, we ask our contributors to make a serious effort to gain those permissions from copyright holders. Part of doing so includes documenting those efforts. Collection Principle 6, a good collection has mechanisms for supplying usage data and other data that allows standardized measures of usefulness to be recorded. Depending on your platform or interface, you might not have a lot of control over what usage data is available to you. At New York Heritage, we provide our contributors with data that shows visits to their collections, as well as New York Heritage website pages dedicated to the institution and their collections. Collecting and sharing this data with stakeholders can show the value of your work and lead to greater support going forward. Additionally, usage data provides insights to how the collections are being used and provide you with direction about future work. Collection Principle 7, good collection is interoperable. Interoperability, in this case, means how the data that makes up your collection can be shared between different systems. One of the ways we can do this is through using metadata standards and controlled vocabularies to describe objects in our collections. Creating quality metadata increases the likelihood that your collection can be integrated with other collections. Collection Principle 8, a good collection integrates into the user's own workflow. Users can mean the staff working on the collections and also end users. For staff, you want to make sure you've dedicated proper resources to the project, that the work to create and maintain digital collection becomes integrated into their regular responsibilities. And for the end user, it's important that they can access the collections in the spaces where they are working. And finally, Collection Principle 9, a good collection is sustainable over time. This builds on Principle 3, which said good collection is curated, which is to say its resources are actively managed during the entire life cycle. However, in this case, the focus is on institutional commitments, such as ensuring that the funds continue to be available to support the collection, or that the hardware and other technical processes integral to maintaining the collections are available over time. So now that we have a framework for what makes a good digital collection, let's focus on some specific things you should do prior to putting together a digital collection. Please remember that these are not one-size-fits-all instructions. Like the 9 principles, I encourage you to find what works for you and apply it to your processes. We're going to look at 3 things today. First, gain intellectual control over your physical collections. 2, write a digital collections development policy. And 3, establish a criteria collecting what items you will be digitizing. These early steps are often what is missing in some of my conversations with our members. A big reason for this is it takes a lot of time and many conversations with stakeholders. However, what you are putting in place is a model that can be replicated or adapted for your work going forward. So intellectual control is a term that many of you are probably familiar with. According to the Dictionary of Archives terminology, intellectual control is the establishment and maintenance of documentation that describes and accommodates access to the informational content of archival resources. An example of this would be if you think about all the work that goes into producing a finding aid. I heard the term recently being used by a local archivist. We were discussing a digitization project with the town historian's office, and it was clear that more work needed to be done to identify what were the office's digitization's plans. The archivist recommended that the town historian establish intellectual control over these collections before undertaking any digitization project. It's not uncommon to get a call that goes something like this. We want to digitize our collections and put them into New York Heritage. What is often missing from these conversations is information about how the collection has been organized, its scope, description of its contents, or how they are to be used. The primary reason is that this step requires a lot of work. There's often pressure to bring these collections to light. Creating a digital collection is often seen as a solution. However, without having a proper handle on the contents of the collection, you risk haphazardly scanning items that may not be relevant or appropriate to the collection you're trying to create. I have a colleague that says buying a scanner is the easiest part of any digitization project. The last thing I will say about intellectual control in digital collections comes from an article I read that detailed work being done to digitize the unstable film negatives. The authors described digitization as enhancing intellectual control and providing item-level description. Digitization, or building a digital collection, is not a substitute for documentation about your collections. It's meant to enhance what we know about the items contained within them. A second piece of this work is crafting a digital collection development policy. So let's just return to collection principle 1. A good digital collection is created according to an explicit collection development policy. A digital collections development policy establishes a criteria for determining what collections will be digitized, preserved, and made accessible. Much like a collection development policy for your physical collections, the purpose of this document is to be a guide for selecting and prioritizing what you're going to digitize. This policy can and should work in conjunction with your other collection development policies. And so some common components of a collection development policy would include a mission statement, a scope statement, and selection criteria. Let's take a closer look at each of these components. For this section, I'll be referencing the collection development policy for New York Heritage Digital Collections. It's a document that we share with our members interested in contributing to New York Heritage. So let's start with the mission statement. New York Heritage Digital Collections, created and maintained by the Empire State Library Network, promotes access to a wealth of historical resources held by cultural heritage institutions so that inquiring minds can learn more about people, places, and events that contribute to the making of New York State. Your mission statement should define the purpose and goals of your project. The second part of the policy is the content scope. For example, New York Heritage Digital Collections features curated selections of digital cultural heritage materials from libraries, library systems, historical societies, museums, archives, and other cultural institutions in the state of New York. Proposed collections should be regional, statewide, or wider should be of regional, statewide, or wider historical interest. Content that is of only internal interest to an organization may not be accepted. Digital collections should support the educational, recreational, and informational needs of the people. So the content scope defines what the project is and is not. In this case, the statement defines the following. The types of organizations contribute to the site include libraries, library systems, historical societies, museums, archives, and other cultural institutions in the state of New York. It also indicates the types of contents that should and should not be included. Collections should be of regional, statewide, or wider historical interest. Content that is only of internal interest to any organization may not be accepted. Digital collections should support the educational, recreational, and informational needs of the people of New York. So right there, it just really just outlines the types of things that you're going to expect to see in this collection, as well as the types of things that you should be contributing to this collection. The last piece to include in your collection development policy is a selection criteria to help in your decision-making process. In this slide, you can see some examples of criteria that would be part of your digital collection development policy. So significance and uniqueness. This is something when you're considering the collections that you have, you might want to focus on things that are unique to your region, unique to the state. These are sort of the types of things that kind of allow you to sort of uncover things that aren't sort of commonly known. Existing metadata. This could be really helpful if you already have some descriptive information about the items in your collection. It really just saves you a lot of times in terms of having to create this information from scratch. Completeness. Do you have a, one thing that comes to mind when I think about completeness is if you have a collection of, say, yearbooks that you're going to be digitizing, do you have a complete run of them? The completeness of a collection sort of can be one of the factors that you consider as to whether or not this is worth doing. And then use. Do you have a, sort of an established use for this collection? Do you have an audience that in mind that sort of needs access to it? Of course, the condition of the collection. This is something that would be sort of a really important consideration because one, like you have to consider whether or not, like by digitizing this collection, am I not only making it sort of available, but does digitizing going to do further harm to it? So you kind of got to weigh that, weigh those factors when you're making a decision and including this in your selection criteria. And then also, like, are you providing access to fragile or otherwise inaccessible objects? That is often one of the main reasons why people want to digitize their objects in these collections, is to provide access to something that would otherwise be damaged through regular use. And then the thing is just, is this a collection that is going to bring attention to hidden and underrepresented voices? This is something that a lot of institutions and a lot of organizations are really focusing on. And if you do have collections that capture these underrepresented voices, it's really good to bring them out because they often tell sort of a different story, or they create a more fuller picture of what's going on in your region. And it's important to remember that digitization work comes with a cost, and you don't want to waste resources by doing work that falls outside your collection development policy. Having a selection criteria will ensure that your work fits within an agreed upon set of parameters. So now I'd like to talk in some detail about digitization. There are several logistical considerations to be made before you start digitizing your collections. In most cases, these are things that you'll want to consider for other types of projects as well. And in this section, we'll be talking about people, equipment and tools, working with a vendor, and then also access and preservation. Before you start, identify who are the people that will be working on this project. Be sure to create clear roles and responsibilities. Institutions, large and small, will depend on a mix of people that could include staff, student workers, and volunteers. Identify training needs in advance. This includes training on the software and hardware that they'll be using, but also the workflows you've created for scanning items and creating metadata. I can't stress this last part enough. And this really is true for all the work that you're going to be doing, is to create documentation for really every step of your project, but create documentation for the workflows and communicate regularly with your team. Over the course of a project, student workers, volunteers, and even staff will change. It's important to make sure that they have a clear understanding of the responsibilities that they are following, and that they are following the project's requirements. Check in regularly. The last thing you want to discover is that a significant amount of work has been completed out of specification. You'll find that occasionally does happen, but the more conversations that you're having throughout the entire process with your staff and people working on this project, you really do avoid those types of mistakes. Another set of things to consider is what types of hardware and software that you have access to. Access to a dedicated workstation, including hardware such as scanning equipment and storage devices, are important. Ideally, you would limit access to this equipment to avoid accidental erasure of your files or changes to settings. Also consider the appropriateness of the hardware for your project. A flatbed scanner is a good option for photographs, letters, or similar documents. If you're scanning manuscripts with a fragile binding or oversized material like maps, you'll want to invest in a different equipment. This is also the point where you should consider working with a vendor that can handle sort of these unique items, the oversized or fragile items in your collection. You also want to identify software needs. If you're scanning in-house, you'll likely need to do some image editing to prepare your files to be published. Metadata. This is typically uploaded onto the platform you're using. In my experience, it's usually a tab delimited or a similar type of text file that's created in a spreadsheet, such as Google Sheets or Excel. Going into your project and knowing your hardware and software needs, as well as their limitations in advance, will really help ensure your project goes smoothly. When deciding to work with a vendor or go it alone, there are a number of factors to consider. What scanning equipment do you have access to? Many consumer flatbed scanners can only accommodate standard sizes. If you're scanning larger objects or monographs, you'll likely need a specialized scanner. Smaller loose page objects, such as photographs or letters, may easily be scanned in-house. So what are your requirements for your digital image? Resolution requirements can vary depending on the object. So be sure that the tools you're using to scan can meet those requirements. Does the condition of the collection require special handling? Do you have the ability to scan the objects in a way that does not further damage them? Staff availability, the project's time constraints, and scanning costs should also be a consideration. In addition to being able to handle a variety of material types, a vendor may be able to scan at a faster rate than working in-house. This would allow you to dedicate staff time to the selection of materials and describing the contents of the collection. When choosing a vendor, it's best to seek recommendations from others who've gone through the process. At New York Heritage, we maintain a list of local and non-local vendors. However, we don't typically work directly with them. So my recommendation is to talk with your colleagues about their experiences. Before contacting a vendor, determine that your needs. This includes the technical requirements such as file types and image resolutions. Prepare your physical collections in advance to avoid any unnecessary scanning or duplication of work. Identify any items that need special care and handling. Ask to see a sample as early as possible to address any changes that might need to be made. So now we're going to talk about digitization and digital preservation. Before I start, I want to mention an upcoming DHPSNY webinar. Webinar Digital Preservation and Planning is going to be done by my colleague, Jennifer Palmentiro. She's the Digital Services Manager at the Southeastern New York Library Resources Council. And that webinar will take place on August 20th at 1 p.m. I would really encourage you to attend this webinar because she's going to go into much more detailed discussion about this topic. So the first thing I want to say about the topic is that we need to make a distinction between digitization and digital preservation. These two terms are often used interchangeably, or it's assumed that by digitizing an object, you are preserving it. I often will hear this from, not necessarily directly from like our members who are going to be doing this work, but a lot of times stakeholders, community members who sort of want to have a sort of role or be part of this process in some way. And so they come in sort of with this idea that just by digitizing these objects, you're preserving them. I think what I always try to do is start with a definition of what digitization is. And so a good one that I found is from the Digital Curation Projects Made Easy, a step-by-step guide for libraries, archives, museums by Carmen Kowick that defines digitization as the process of taking a physical or analog object and creating a digital copy of that object. So the goal of digitization is to increase access to an object or a collection. Digital preservation is a separate stage in the digital project's lifecycle, and it's meant to ensure that the digital objects last as long as the analog versions or longer. Simply put, digital preservation is the process of taking care of the digital objects and ensure long-term access. So just again to stress, you can sort of tell your stakeholders that digitization does not equal digital preservation. Digital preservation is a separate process and it requires a substantial investment of organizational resources. So the reason why we want to consider digital preservation is that there are several things that can happen to digital objects over time. They can succumb to bit rot, which is the gradual deterioration of data. The file format obsolescence. In this case, the file format becomes unreadable. Hardware and application obsolescence. The hardware needed to access files is no longer available. A complete look at digital preservation is beyond the scope of today's webinar, which is why I encourage you to attend the webinar next month. But it should be noted that digital preservation is a challenge that many institutions struggle with. Most organizations do not have the resources to meet the requirements of long-term digital preservation. That said, there are a couple of things, or a few things that I always recommend to our members. The first one is the 3-2-1 rule. And this is a handy kind of guideline that you can apply to any sort of digital project. And what it states is that 3 copies saved on 2 different media formats and at least 1 copy backed up off-site. So this can mean something as simple as storing 1 copy on a local hard drive, a second copy stored on a separate storage device, and then a third copy stored in a cloud services such as Google Drive or Dropbox, or examples of a service that you can use. It's not a perfect solution, but it should give you a sense of security that you'll be able to access the data in the event that one of the files is corrupted or unretrievable. I would also recommend you create a digital asset inventory, and I do have a sort of screenshot of what I mean by this. This is an inventory of files associated. What you're looking at now is an inventory of the inventory of files associated with 2 different digital collections. It provides a snapshot of what is contained within a particular folder. And I would also, while you're doing this, just sort of always create a README file to include in that folder that provides a brief description of the contents. Years from now, someone might discover your hard drive, and being able to sort of look into a folder and see a README file gives them a really quick idea of what they're going to find. It's just will be very helpful, particularly when you have staff changing or different people working on projects. And then the last thing I'll just stress is that doing anything is better than doing nothing. So even if your solution is to keep a backup drive sort of in a storage closet or a fire safe, it's better than doing nothing. The only thing I would just recommend and stress is that if you are going to do that, just along with any of these sort of techniques, is that make sure you document it. You want to make sure that someone else knows where these files are. And the last thing I want to discuss today is metadata. As I've already mentioned, your digital collections and the objects should be well described. Using consistent, accurate metadata will allow users to effectively search and browse your collections. So why is good metadata important? And so this is going to be a little bit, I'm going to reiterate things a little bit here, but the first, good metadata ensures consistency and quality control across collections. This is extremely important with a site like New York Heritage Digital Collections, where contributors are coming from many different organizations. Second, quality metadata increases the likelihood that your collections can be integrated with other collections. This is the interoperability that we were looking for in a good digital collection. And finally, quality metadata provides a better user experience. It increases an objects or collections findability. So let's just first talk about 3 different types of metadata. First, descriptive metadata. This describes the object or data that gives the basic facts: who created it, title, the date created, and the subject. The second is structural metadata. This describes the structure of an object, including its components and how they are related. It also describes the format process and interrelatedness of objects, and it can be used to facilitate navigation or define the format or sequence of complex objects. So the best example I can sort of give you for this is just think about presenting a book, a digitized version of the book. You have paragraphs, you have chapters. different, appendices, different sections. Structural metadata allows you to sort of maintain that the structure of the physical item and present it to the user in that way. Administrative metadata includes information about management of the object and may include information about preservation and rights management, creation date, copyright permissions, required software, provenance, and file integrity checks. And those file integrity checks are typically related to digital preservation. For the rest of the conversation, we're going to just focus on descriptive metadata. So here's a sample of metadata record for a photo to the right. A good metadata can tell us quite a bit about a digital object and the original source. So by looking at this photograph and then comparing it to the metadata, I can see that the people in this photograph include George Davalos and Bessie Brady. This photograph was taken between 1975 and 1980. And the dimensions of the photograph, this black and white photograph is approximately, 4 by 5 inches. And then we can also see where the original copy of the photograph is kept. It's Perry Public Library. As you can see, quality metadata can tell us quite a bit about an object. In the next few slides, I'd like to highlight a few metadata fields that are typically required or recommended and talk about how they should be used. So common metadata elements, no matter what sort of standard you're using, you're going to have a title. So an object should have a brief, descriptive, and unique title. If there are multiple objects with the same title, additional information is needed to make each title unique. This could be a date, a location, or a number. This is something that we regularly stress with our members, is to just make sure that your titles are distinct. It really helps the end user to sort of make a distinction, make that distinction between the things that they are looking at. And there are a number of, I said, easy ways to do this simply by adding a date or a sequence number, something like that. Creator, enter personal names in an inverted form, last name, first name, middle name, or initial. If you know the birth and death dates, include those. We just do not encourage the use of honorifics, titles, or nicknames unless it's necessary to disambiguate the people. For example, if there's just the first name of the person is unknown. Whenever possible, use a name authority tool, such as the Library of Congress name authority file. Subjects. Select subject terms from controlled vocabulary. Controlled vocabularies ensure consistency and can improve the quality of the search results. There are a number of controlled vocabularies to choose from, including the Library of Congress subject headings, the thesaurus for graphic materials, or the art and architecture thesaurus. Date of original. The date of original indicates when the original object was published. And if the public object was never published, it should indicate when the object was created. Dates of original and any really dates in general are just such a really important part of your digital objects. They are one of the fields that you can typically facet on when you're searching, and using and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but being consistent with how you format dates is really important, because it really impacts how the sorted results are presented. So make sure that you know that you're using the appropriate format, and then when available, use the dates. And then rights information. This is just information about the rights held in and over the object. We've already established the importance of respecting intellectual property rights. Providing a rights statement tells the user about the copyright and reuse status of the objects in your collection. At New York Heritage, we use rightstatements.org's statements. These have been widely adopted by cultural heritage sites like New York Heritage and others. The other thing I'll mention about having a rights statements is that is often required for that interoperability that we talked about. This is something that if you want your collections to be integrated with other ones or shared, it's really important that you have a well-defined rights statement. And we always will point our members to using rightstatements.org. It just presents a very clear sort of understandable, really clear and something that's really understandable for the end user, just to understand how they can use this material. And so there are several best practices that I will recommend when writing metadata. The first is be consistent when describing your digital objects within your collection or collections. You want to make sure that there is no real sort of discrepancy, particularly when you're describing similar objects. That consistency will really help the end user in terms of sort of sorting through search results, finding similar objects. Use controlled vocabularies. Controlled vocabularies allow for consistent search results. Excuse me. Common fields that require a controlled vocabulary include the creator, subject, geographic names, and language. Content standards indicate how content is formatted within a metadata element. So an example of this would be, we talked a little bit about it just a few slides ago, but the formatting of a proper name. Formatting your names so that they are last name, first name, middle name, or initial. These are sort of just very simple things you can do, and you want to make sure that you do them consistently. Another thing of particular importance that I talked about is sort of how you, not only just sort of including a date, but how you format that date. Following the format of year, month, day, this ensures that your items are sorted appropriately when they're part of search results. And then we also recommend that you use specific terms and codes. Ideally, you are relying on a number of limited terms to represent the types of material and the physical format. Again, using these limited terms allow you to make, sort of give you, or it doesn't give you, but that allows for a very consistent representation of your collection within the platform that you're using, and then also helps the end user that to sort of discover the results that they're looking for in discovering similar items. So for New York Heritage contributors, we've created a metadata dictionary and usage guide to provide our members with a set of best practices and to assist them in creating metadata for their digital objects. I've included a link to the guide as well as our collection development policy at the end of the presentation. So as I wrap up, one of the last bit of information that I want to share with you is about ESLN digital services. Each council has a liaison that can support your work building digital collections. I would encourage you to reach out to them and to find out what resources are available to you as a member. I would also say don't let your membership status so necessarily discourage you from contacting one of these individuals. They are always happy to talk to people in their region about digital collections and sort of the best practices related to those. In addition, many of the councils provide grant funds for digital projects, and several provide digitization services. So just remember, we are here to support your work, so please get in touch. I did provide at the end of this one of the final slides that you'll see includes contacts for our various councils, so you will have access to those as well. The other thing I want to add is that if you are an ESLN member through your local library council, you're eligible to participate in a number of services designed to support a variety of information and collection types. New York Heritage Digital Collections, which we've talked a bit about today, currently hosts collections from more than 400 libraries, museums, and archives, and other community organizations. And we provide free online access to 350,000 digitized photographs, letters, manuscripts, maps, memorabilia, books, and more. And this is really, if you're, particularly if you're a small institution, this is a really great way to provide access to your unique collections. The next one is the Empire Archival Discovery Cooperative. This is a service that hosts finding aids from across the state. Locally created finding aids can be harvested through various processes that they've established on the site. Or if you do not already have finding aids, or if, say, you have a collection of printed finding aids, you can use the site's web form to create finding aids from scratch. And if you do not have any familiar familiarity with creating finding aid using EAD, you don't need that. The finding aid will really just sort of walk you through the entire process. It's a really fantastic service. New York State Historic Newspapers, one of our most popular services, and this provides a wide range of newspapers from New York's past. We're always looking for contributions from our members to fill in missing titles or issues. And then Empire State Immersive Experience. This is a growing collection of 360-degree panoramic tours. We've seen a lot of really interesting uses for this site, including walking tours of, say, parks, or even a walking tour of within a library or other spaces. And then also people have used it for instructional training, particularly if they have remote students. This is, again, another service that's relatively new and it's growing, but we would encourage you to reach out and ask questions and get involved. And then the final service that I just wanted to talk about is the ESLN Academic Institutional Repository. And this is a relatively new service designed for ESLN's academic members. And so we've partnered with Ubiquity Press to provide access to their institutional repository platform at a really discounted rate. We have several libraries already on board, including Niagara University, Lemoyne, Nazareth University, and 3 or 4 others, and a couple coming on board. So if this is a service, if you're an academic member, if you have an interest in having your own institutional repository, please get in touch. Actually, you can reach out to me directly. It's a big part of one of the other projects that I'm on, and I'll be happy to sort of loop in your local council, and we can figure out a way to see, figure out if this is a service that is good for you and if it's something that you want to sign up for. And then, as I mentioned, this is the contact us form. If you have any questions about any of these platforms, I would encourage you to get in touch with your local council. You can see that these councils are sort of separated by counties. So if you're not exactly sure who your county is, just take a look for who your council is. Take a look for your county, and then you have the contact information for the council liaison, and as well as their email address. I know that they would love to hear from you and learn more about your projects, and they are, as always, here to help get you started. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, we have a couple of comments and questions that sort of have popped in throughout. So we're going to start just from the top. Our first one is from Jane, who asks, what DPI is recommended for digitization? There are some digital collection who seem to be using too low a DPI to be able to read newsprint when you enlarge it enough to be able to read.
Yeah, that the DPI or the resolution is going to be largely dependent upon the item that you're digitizing. So, for example, a newspaper will have a different DPI than a photograph. So there are some resources out there, and I'd be happy to include them after this that will sort of specify the type of the DPI that you should use for that particular item. So we don't want to see anything digitized less than 300 DPI, and particularly for like photographs. The other thing would be sort of taking into consideration the reason why you're digitizing it. So digitizing something for access may not require as high as a DPI that, say, digitizing for preservation. But I will be sure to include something that sort of outlines some detailed specifications.
Great. Our next question is, does a digital item within a collection have the same ID number as the physical item? For example, an accessioned item in a collection.
The ID, I would say that if you're talking about sort of my experiences with this has been that, yes, you could indicate that the ID sort of matched that, because it's a really kind of helpful way to connect the two pieces. The other thing that I often see sometimes including with an ID is that they will use the portion of the file name and I didn't talk really about file names here, and I think it's worth some discussion about that, is that, one of the things you want to make sure you're doing is that you're creating your objects with file names that are sort of recognizable, and then also in a way sequential. So a lot of times people will use the file name that they create, which could be sort of an alphanumeric code with that sequential number at the end of it, without the suffix. So they'll just use the prefix part of a file name and then use that as the ID.
So our next question is pretty beefy, and I don't think we have enough time to get into it, but luckily DHPSNY has already done an entire other webinar on it. So the question is, any suggestions for content management? How to use a content management system? What factors are most important for digital preservation and access? So I'm going to drop in a link to a previous webinar that DHPSNY has done that touches on this a little bit more in depth. But Ryan, if you have anything to add, please feel free to.
So I would recommend the first thing I would do is I'd recommend for the preservation part of this. I would recommend Jen's webinar next month. She's got some sort of experience with this that I think probably will sort of answer some of those questions. In terms of like content management systems or the platforms you use, this sort of can be tricky, really dependent upon what type of not what type of organization, but like sort of what are your organizational resources. And so if you're talking about, can you repeat the first part of that question? I want to make sure I address.
So it's just any suggestions for content management.
So in terms of recommendations for content management systems, if that's what you're talking about, there are, there's obviously a lot of them out there. And sort of the more I talk about this, the less sort of helpful I think I will be answering that, because I'm not really sure if you're talking about systems or for process of content management. So I think what I'm going to do is defer to the webinar that you mentioned earlier. And if there is a more specific question about systems, please feel free to email me.
And I am just going to double plug our upcoming webinar with Jen. That'll be in August. Okay, so next question is, what is the best EDRMS to use? If you have any recommendations. And this person is from Mali. I'm probably butchering that, but
Yeah.
a little farther away than what we're used to.
I'm not sure that I can provide a good answer to that question. I apologize for that.
Fair enough. Next question is there something similar to ESIE in New York City?
I'm not familiar with EXIE. Have a little bit more information.
Catherine, do you think you could post just a quick little follow-up for your question so we can answer it a little better? And then while you're typing that, we have a couple of more. One of the questions in the chat was resources for creating finding aids. So I've dropped in another link to a DHPSNY webinar all about finding aids that we did a year or two ago. Catherine followed up and said it was the 360 images you showed.
Oh, so easy is, I'm sorry, ESIE, it was that, I heard it differently. So, okay, so easy. So the the Easy platform was developed out of our Western New York Library Resources Council, actually when in conjunction with the Metro Council in New York City. Part of it is built on the Archipelago platform that the Metro Council has developed, and that being mainly the form tool. So what I would recommend is that if that's something that you're interested in, you can talk to the Metro Council. Nate's contact is there. I'm sure they would be happy to share some information about how you can get involved. And you can also contact go to the Easy platform and contact them directly as well. Jay Barone is the person the person at the Western New York Library Resource Council that works with that project and can really answer any questions. But as far as I know, in terms of what's available statewide, it is that Easy platform out of the Western New York Council.
Great. Next, and as of now, this is our last question, but folks might type it in while we're answering this. If you find a born digital file, is it best practice to retain the original file name, even if that name doesn't appear systematic or intentional?
So I think it's important to sort of document in some way, but if I think I understand what the question is in terms of like, I think going back to my original point about like finding aids, or not finding aids, I'm sorry. My point about file names is that I think it's really important that you have sort of like when you're organizing your files that they're sort of that part of the file name makes them sort of recognizable not only as an item but also recognizable as part of a collection as well. I have to be honest and just say that I don't have a lot of familiarity working with born digital collections and sort of some of the standard practices around that. I think it's a very good question, and but unfortunately I don't know that I'd be able to give you that answer, a definitive answer. But just to say that I think it's really important that you are like thinking about that, but also like that file name part is just so important in terms of sort of how you thinking about it from an sort of how you organizing your collections. As I said, making that finding aids something that is recognizable and connected to a larger collection.
Okay, and we did get another comment / question in the chat. Is there a webinar or guidelines for digitizing full archival collections that will be linked from the folder listing in the finding aid? Some of today's points may not be as applicable to that, whereas others might. I mean, we can link you some resources for digitizing full collections, I'm sure, in our follow-up email. I'm not sure if there's any further clarification needed for that question. Sorry.
I'm not sure of any webinars off the top of my head or like specific guidelines. The way that I'm in sort of interpreting this is sort of would be sort of taking the items from like in archives and finding aids and sort of digitizing like each of them. And so like it sounds to me like it's just sort of like what are sort of the best practices or processes for sort of undertaking that. I think that's the question I have. I can't point to anything specific.
And once again, we will be listing all these resources, and I'll also include the links that have been shared in the chat, as well as a PDF of this slideshow in our follow-up email. After we close out this room, there is going to be a quick survey. I just ask you to please take that if you have the space for it. It'll only take you a few minutes, and it really helps us with the direction for our future programming, so you can get more fantastic resources like today's webinar. So with that, we are coming up to the end. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to info@DHPSNY.org, or Ryan is also sharing his contact information as well. So thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.